for the workshop, and we are going to discuss budget.
Yeah, so this is our budget update workshop. It's what we often call the big rocks. So we're focused on the big drivers of our budget for next school year. So this is a really early look at things. There's a lot of work to be done, as you saw from that budget development timeline. But we like to give a heads up of kind of like where we think we are today. And I'll talk through the memo that's there in front of you. I shared that via email a little bit earlier as well. Expenses, revenues, etc. But Patty does the deep dive into the financial experts at a fine grain level. And then we also have kind of like a big overview on 5-year financial projections. So I will caveat this, that some of our assumptions assume that title funding and special education funding at the federal level won't change. It'll be approximately the same. We don't anticipate any changes there despite the administrative change, but it is a possibility depending on what the House and the Senate do, depending. So, revenue limit, the per pupil revenue limit is estimated to increase by $325 per student. However, our total revenue is impacted by ongoing declining enrollment. So while we'll get a little bit more dollars per kid, we have fewer kids total. And so that changes our revenue. For the 25-26 school year, we anticipate a decline of 118 FTE on the 3-year average. So over 100 kids lost for next year on our 3-year average. Based on the MD Roffers report, that is expected to kind of even out as we move forward. It's, I think next year's this is our last big drop, and then it'll start getting smaller each year until we settle in at around 30 to 35, which is a lot better than it has been in the hundreds consistently over the last few years. And that's really the reflective of the series of recessions we had since 2003. 2003, 2008, 2011, a series of recessions that really dropped birth rates in our area, and they have consistently held as a result. Expenses, we're anticipating about a 3% increase in wages. 2.95% is the CPI that's established by the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission as of July 1 for 2025. We're also including a provision to attract and retain speech-language pathologists. We have, it's a really, really hard to find position right now. And when we don't have folks in those roles, because it's a special education role, we're either required to provide summer instruction as compensatory services, which is an expense, or we've had to contract out to virtual providers, which are often twice as expensive as hiring internally. And so a small provision to help attract and retain that is similar to other school districts in the state, we feel will give us a leg up to getting folks in those roles.
So I'm just curious, because the plural here, pathologists, so it's not a single position that's being added at a $60,000 salary?
No, it's
It's an amount added to our existing positions in that role?
it's a retention bonus or or traction. What is the other type of bonus?
Yeah, it's,
Attracting and retaining.
right.
Okay.
So we'd offer the same amount of money to the folks who are already here, so we don't create a disparity with
Right.
those we're trying to attract. And so it's $3,000 for each of 2 years if you come to our school district, and $3,000 for 2 years if you stay with our district. We don't want to create disparities between those who've been loyal to the school district and cause hard feelings. They might leave then, and we're also trying to attract other folks. This is similar to what exists in some other school districts when we look at postings online, and so we're trying to be competitive with the job market. We ran it by our LEA folks so that they're aware and they understand the circumstances, and they don't want our existing school pathologists to be working overtime and extra in order to meet our needs. They want good working conditions for them as well.
Good.
Health insurance, with the 24-25 change in our insurance plan, we do have a 7.5% cap increase. That is a lot. However, early indications are that we have potential for our increase to be only 4%. So our historical experience was like 120% medical loss ratio, meaning that for every dollar of expenses, or every dollar that we put in, we were spending $1.20. And so our insurance companies were losing money, which they don't like to do.
Go figure.
That is flipped this year. Because of our plan change, we're much better positioned for our medical loss ratio. And so the increase as a result at 4% is less than medical inflation generally, which is about 5 to 7% the last few years. And so that 4% renewal rate that we're likely to receive is indicative of the beneficial change that we made. Come at the expense of our employees' pocketbooks, and we're recognizing that, but it has made a difference in our health insurance costs. Other expenses, we're budgeting a 1% increase for transportation, utilities, services, et cetera. When we look at revenues and expenses, we still end up with a deficit budget. Our revenues simply aren't enough to cover our expenses that are increasing that we anticipate. The reduction of health insurance increase to 4% would save us about $270,000. Our tiered route system and our bell schedule changes will reduce our transportation costs by about $270,000. And then we would underfund our OPEB contribution by $2.2 million. We have a fund balance in there now, and so we're capable of making our contributions to our employees. But by underfunding that, we would help cover a substantial portion of our deficit, and the remaining budget deficit we'll be addressing through our ongoing deficit or budgeting process.
So the remaining budget deficit here of 534,000, this can't yet incorporate any of the savings which haven't been realized from the referendum plans.
Correct.
That's
yeah.
all for the future.
For the
So,
future,
right,
yeah.
and I know you have the note down here that with that passage, we'll be able to get the necessary reductions.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll let Patty talk about that second page there, the blue and red. This kind of walks through what I talked through, but kind of more of the specifics that we're thinking about.
Right, so we start with the base revenue and compare it. So when you have that $325 increase per member, that's really important because that adds to your base for the following year. If the state doesn't allow any per pupil increase, then there's no increase in that base for the next year. So that is reflected there as an estimated $518,000. The operating referendum exemption is the same for 24-25 to 25-26, so we're not experiencing any additional revenue limit authority in that area. And then this is outside the revenue limit, but it's really important because it brings quite a few dollars in it, and that's the per pupil categorical aid rate. That stayed the same it stayed the same in the last biennial budget for both of the years. So we don't know what's gonna happen, so we're just using the same amount, the $742, but you multiply that against the 3-year membership average. And so if we have declining enrollment, it's gonna be less because the rate is still the same, but the membership has changed, has declined. Mm-hmm.
Patty, I assume this is included in our budget book somewhere. I don't know if you know off the top of your head. The categorical aid rate, has it ever gone down, or have there just been flat years?
The rate,
Yeah.
so all of our categorical aid we're funded at different rates. So when we talk about like special ed categorical aid, that's at like 30%.
Are you talking about that
I
742?
mean the 742 here. So if we're taking
742,
as an
it's gone
assumption,
up But
Okay.
it's been at 742 for quite a few years.
That's what I thought I remembered. I
Mhm.
just wanted to be sure, because if we're taking that as an assumption, that feels like a safe assumption. so,
Yes.
Yeah, there's a proposal to increase both the revenue limit and the per pupil categorical aid by the governor in this next biennium. For districts that are wealthier, have a higher value per pupil, prefer categorical aid because they get more dollars per student. As a result, it positively impacts their taxes. Whereas school districts that are poorer in property value per student prefer equalized aid because that positively impacts their taxes. And so the use of these two different tools has been used by the legislature to balance the needs of different types of school districts across the state.
So there's proposals to increase these, but we're assuming no change because you don't know what the legislature's gonna
Right.
do, is that
The
correct?
one thing in state law is the 325 per student
Mhm.
on the revenue limit.
Mhm.
That's the only change that we're anticipating right
Okay.
now. So we project very conservatively, like
That's good.
the least budget when we're thinking about things. If there's more, that's great, we'll make adjustments, we'll figure it out. But we're not gonna anticipate a panacea of funding.
It doesn't seem likely at this point either that they are going to act to remove the 325 increase.
Very
I don't-
unlikely.
I don't hear a lot about that right now, so.
No, it would require something in the biennium that talked about it,
Mhm.
which would then be ripe for line
That
item
wonderful
vetoing
line
to make
item
it even
veto.
bigger. And so the majority party right now would be very hesitant to write anything in the legislation about that,
Mhm.
unless it's a standalone bill, which the governor would never sign, so.
And it's unlikely to be veto-proof, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
vote
yeah,
beyond the
right.
veto, and that's the end, right?
Yep.
So we're just looking then at the net revenue change. This is all before exemptions, it's before any increase in voucher school payments. So this is just the base revenue. And so we are in the black right now, but not much. So when you take into consideration the increased costs that we had talked about earlier, that would put us at about almost 3.3 million in the red. And then if we offset it by some of the potential reductions in costs, we come up with a deficit of that 534,815 that we'll take care of just through the budget process. So that's just a very early estimate. Yep.
So help me understand, between these two documents, the one we got that Dr. Engel went through, so the net change in revenue, you have 304,777, and you've got on your sheet with the blue and the red, 430. So why, and
So,
then,
yeah, great question. So there's these two different documents, and there's slightly different numbers on each. The colorful one is Patty's, very fine grade, detailed oriented. This is likely to be accurate, very close to what's actually gonna happen. This is the document that I use for kind of broad, long-range planning to make sure our targets are kind of on track. Like, what are the broad shifts over time? So Patty's document's the one we use for like this next year, very close fiscal planning. The document that has all the numbers on it and the graph at the bottom, this I use for kind of longer range planning. It's not as accurate as Patty's, it's kind of big picture, where are we headed? So as long as the numbers are moving in the right direction and they're reasonable estimates, and Patty and I compare numbers and they're very close, but slightly different assumptions as we move forward. And we'll refine those as we move throughout the year. And so my goal with this longer 5-year projection is just to make sure that if we do what we say we're gonna do, things are gonna move in the right direction. And that does seem to be the case. On those 5-year projections, we start off with, a $500,000 deficit, and it slowly closes over time. And as long as we're able to, reduce those expenses through the consolidation, which we anticipate, then we should be achieving a balanced budget in 3 years.
okay. So my other question is, with your document here on the bottom, on the savings, so we don't see any of the reduced expense on the consolidation till the 27-28 school year. However, as I understand it, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, if the referendum hadn't passed, we told the public we're gonna have to make cuts like right now.
Yes.
And we said with the referendum, we could do it through attrition. So it seems to me there's 2 years of attrition we could be taking advantage of to get us there, right?
We will be, yes.
Is any of that built into any of this?
No.
Okay.
But it could be part of the 518,000 thing
Correct.
we will work out, because we don't have resignations yet,
Mhm.
so we can't guess what the attrition will be.
Right, right.
So I'm guessing that this number that we're gonna try to address through the budgeting process is in part addressed by,
So the question will be, let's say that we have a
Attrition.
custodian retire at one of our schools. Every single time we have a resignation, we ask ourselves, do we still need to fill this position? Is this part of our longer strategy for natural attrition when we consolidate schools? And we might say, let's say with a custodial position, to be down a person and making somebody work double hours or overtime, like, that's not reasonable at this time. And we know from history, we have 2 resignations in our custodial group a year, and so we can wait a year at least before we make that decision. Another thing might be, we'll have a teacher retirement that we know is coming in 25, 26, or even 26, 27. And we could have class sizes of 26 in that building for a year instead of, 18 as our target. We'd have to ask the question, like, is that worth it to have really high classes in, a kindergarten class, or do we want to rehire that person on a 1 year and let them know, like, hey, this is a 1 year, you're not going to be rehired back next year because we're eliminating this position. And so part of that taking advantage of attrition in advance is hiring folks on like 1 year probationary contracts. Like, they know up front they're not getting a job the following year unless some other movement happens, but that position will be eliminated. And so we'll start to be able to take advantage of that as soon as this year. And we might even have people on, 2-year contracts where we say, like, you're not coming back in 2 years, just so you know, unless other things change. And so we'll be able to take advantage of some of those savings early in certain positions, but it's hard to not fill a evening custodian position. It's hard not to fill a kindergarten teacher. But there may be places where we can do that. We can,
I mean, if this building's offline in September, we won't need a custodian.
correct. Mhm. Absolutely.
Do we have any history of using those short, limited term positions, those 1 or 2 year non-renewable contracts?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
Yep, we've done that when we closed Lincoln. It was a short time
Oh,
frame,
sure.
but folks that were on probation or we hired them like even right afterwards, like, hey, you're only hired for 6 months, like, this is gonna go away. Folks knew that, eyes wide open. We try and be transparent with folks as much as possible.
Yeah.
So this is my last question, and anybody else, but when the operating referendum was passed, the board would set the amount to include opportunities for staff increases for the 5 years or whatever the length of time is.
Correct.
So where does that figure into all of this?
That's just built into our operating revenue now, and so if we had to put our finger on the positions that hires, it would be our academic and behavioral success coaches at the.
But it was
elementary,
also
middle,
for
and high.
staff increases, there was,
Yep, those were the
Those
ones.
were the staff.
They maintained staff that we had achieved through ESSER funding.
I understood the staff increases to be like raises in
Oh,
pay, like
no.
4%, wasn't there a discussion like that?
Oh,
The
there was,
3%, the 3% that you have put in the projection.
it went from 10.25 to 10.5, there was a $250,000 in there for a pay raise that year. That is correct.
I thought it was for each of the years.
It was 1 year. I mean, it continues on in perpetuity. It wasn't a bonus. It was a permanent addition to salary for staff. And so they gained the benefit of it every year thereafter. It wasn't continual 0.25 each year.
And so the CPI 2.95, that's You know, that's the floor of increase that's happening.
That's what we're projecting.
Okay,
The
when do we
floor-
go into our next negotiation round?
We'll wait until after the biennium's figured
Okay.
out. It's not fair to negotiate without all the cards on
Right.
the table for either
Of
party,
course.
you know, so we'll find out what the state gives us for revenue, and then we'll meet with and we have already ongoing joint leadership meetings with unions on a consistent basis. We'll formally meet probably for the first time in April or May as we kind of get joint finances, recommendations for the budget.
I think the 5-year plan, while it's nice, we need to understand this is just really throwing mud at the wall and see what sticks. You have an idea of what it's gonna be, but we don't know what the legislation's gonna do. I mean, there's a lot of things that can change with this, but it gives you at least something to focus on going forward, where, you know, you're not just pulling numbers out. That's what's nice about this, but it could be totally different. We don't know. I mean, it won't be a big difference, but it could be a lot to our favor if they give more money,
Totally.
or all of a sudden we get, you know, with a new additions to lacrosse, we get more students, and you just don't know, so.
Yep, it's based on some assumptions, you know, based on the best data we have available right now. Could easily change, and certainly every 2 years it does. You know, I don't foresee another Act 10 like in 2011 when we lost $600 per kid, you know, but all it would take is a recession for the government to make different choices about how they allocate funds, and we would have to figure that out too. One of the things that is impacting here is staffing, right? And what are our changes programmatically for the next year? Our process for staffing at each level is for the principals to look at their buildings, and based on enrollment and based on course requests, make proposals to our HR for what they anticipate necessary staffing for the following year. Excuse me. It's pretty stable, you know, if you lose 118 kids, you know, spread out across the school district, you know, that's only 10 kids per grade level about, you know, so it's hard to, you know, realize changes in there necessarily. We're looking at class sizes at the elementary level in each building and trying to figure out how to, you know, like what will it look like for next year. There's always tough spots where, you know, if our goal is 18-1 at the 3rd grade level, you know, but there's 40 kids, do you go up to 20 and 20? Or do you try and split that 3 ways and have really small classes? And so those are the difficult decisions that our principals and directors are working through right now. Early indications at the elementary level will be flat in terms of staffing to potentially up to like a -5 or -6, depending on how things work out. At the middle school level, anticipating flat, maybe 1 reduction or 2 with some slightly smaller 8th grade classes relative to this year. And then at the high school level, pretty flat again also. We've had a greater interest in family and consumer science, and so instead of paying overloads for 2 classes, you know, we might be able to offer another full-time position there, but we also might see some reductions in some other areas like science or English. So that should probably be a wash.
So based on the workshop that we had a while ago, when those start coming in, I think, I certainly know Mr. Bagneski and I are in agreement on this, but getting that information sooner than the budget book in September, I think is helpful for us to have a meaningful conversation. Since that's such a big piece of our budget, I think when we get to that point in September, we feel better prepared, we can have more meaningful discussions rather than just really reactive discussions. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what the rest of the board, how they feel. Again, I think that it's a workshop type of thing. It's not a board action, but it's, because our action shouldn't be at this point. Our action should be when we get to the budget. But again, you're sharing this with us because you want to get our reaction on this too, so we're all marching together.
Yeah, I think at our next board meeting, so one of the things we intend to add, Patty has the kind of the monthly budget update on the second meeting each month. We're gonna add excuse me, an HR update each month as well. That's something that folks have been interested in, vacant positions, fill rate, those sorts of things. But I think the second meeting in March, we could probably have, anticipated HR changes programmatically for the district that we could talk about in a workshop. Like I said, I think it'll be relatively minimal.
Now, one of the things that also affects our staffing is open enrollment. We don't know that number, how many kids are open enrolling in until like the first week of May. And then the principals all get together and see how, if that affects their estimated staffing needs at this point. So it's always kind of evolving. And then we also have the situation where sometimes the first day of school, we have more or less kids than we had anticipated. We've gone to that point of even moving a teacher from one school to another on a grade level because that school could handle maybe just 2 sections and another one you needed 4.
And a budget is a plan. It's a plan, and until
Right.
you hit that date, and again, it's a plan because you won't know next meeting and you won't know in May what the state budget's gonna be. So
Right.
it's our best plan that we can do, and it's, we adjust accordingly as things happen.
I think we could probably give a 85% accurate idea of what we're looking at our next meeting though, and that would be a great workshop to just talk about course requests and class sizes and where things are at. Yeah, and we're always planning for worst case scenarios, if we saw another $600 per student loss, how would we grapple with that? Because it would mean lots of staff would not be able to work here. And so those are things we're ready to do if need be, but hope that we never have to actually do that.
And historically, Patty, your guesses have been pretty close to reality, right? So that's always
True,
comforting
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, but it's always a work in progress, like every time we learn something new, we recalculate the revenue limit, recalculate the aid, and then, we just keep at it all the time.
Yeah.
And
Slow
we
it down.
always have a fiscally conservative approach. We're never anticipating more revenue, and we're always trying to save around the margins continually. And so, like I said, anytime there's a resignation or retirement, do we need to replace that? Can we do something different? Can we do it for less money? Can we do it a different way? And then even as we approach our programs and other things, what is, can we consolidate purchasing? Can we, use a cheaper, just as effective strategy to do the same thing?
Fiscal people want accuracy. Close is, we always appreciate you liking close, but we like it as accurate as possible.
I mean, in terms of estimates, what I appreciate is when you're making an assumption that it's a justifiable assumption and we have a history of success with those things. That's,
Yeah, this is accurate. This is based on a bunch of assumptions to get a good idea where we're headed in the future. And these have worked out too, by and large.
Oh, and it usually does, everyone does, the city does it, I mean, it's just smart.
there's no other way to do it, yeah.
Gives you an idea of where you can go there.
It's, so the projected enrollment on the 3-year average here, I see what you were saying about we have like one more big drop, and then it really starts to hopefully plateau, and that's based on that updated, I can't think of the names.
MD Roffers,
Thank
yep,
you.
that community change report, their estimates show us kind of leveling off.
Has the UW Applied Population Lab done any new work that you know of?
We had one done just last year by them.
Yep.
And then we had the
MD
roofers, and they were pretty comparable.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, yeah, UW Applied Population Lab saw a slightly bigger decrease. MD Roffers, that more fine-grained detail, they kind of moderated that a bit, and so that's good news for us.
But even in light of that, we turned out better on enrollment this year than
Right.
they had
A
projected, so.
little rosy,
Yep.
yeah, that's good.
We hope to beat those numbers, but we're using sensible, prudent numbers to plan for the future, and if we come in better, so much better. That is all we had.
Can I ask another question quick?
Please.
Where are we with, I know we had spoke about, working with the city a little more to, as more of a partner. Have we gone any further, like setting up a game plan with that, or?
Yeah, I reached out to the city, and we're thinking about kind of where to start, you know, there.
Well, new mayor coming in, which is gonna throw a wrinkle into things, but yes.
Totally. Until they hire a city administrator, a lot of the power lies in the department chairs, and so we're working with those folks. I think the two areas that might be most interesting for us to kind of have some collaboration are either Parks and Rec or city planning, you know, to sit down and talk with folks. And it would be interesting to get representatives from both the council and the board to kind of meet and just talk about opportunities, and I've been meeting with some of the department heads to talk about, you know, what's the topic that we talk about, you know, what is the strategy there? And so I can anticipate probably in the next month having an opportunity for us to get together and start to collaborate actively.
No, it's good, thank you.
Yeah, it's been very positive so far.
It needs to be, I mean, really, I think we're we want the same things, we want the same outcomes. And historically, you know, it's been like two different, well, and it's two different boards, but we wanna work together to make lacrosse great, right? So us working that, it not only helps the tax base, but it helps us bring in students, it makes us bring in families, so.
Totally.
I think we really need to work together on that and really develop a closer relationship with our, city board.
Yep, planning and engineering have been great with the projects that we've been working on recently, so that has been really nice to see. There's 40 years of animosity that go back to when we were a city school district, and in the 80s, we split our property, and there was, you know, haggling, and it didn't go well in some cases, and
But with planning, I mean, you have a wonderful lady running it now, and she's very open to that, and, you know, and quite honestly, she's younger, which, you know, us old people are set in our ways, is, you know, but it's good to see that because they're gonna be a good partner, I think. in
Absolutely.
planning.
Andrea Train has been a great
Andrea's
resource
awesome,
to
yes.
us. She served on our facility advisory committee, so she's acutely aware of the issues in the school district. When we've needed information, she's provided, and vice versa. She's reached out any number of occasions for data. We've been happy to provide. Parks and Rec has also been a good partner in how we utilize our spaces and provide opportunities for kids, you know, so.
And you only got a B in algebra
Well, thanks for telling me that, I'll remember to bring that up.
Oh, my goodness.
That's power right there.
So now, these are
Any other comments?
years that we knew.
Thank you for all your information. If you want to hand your pencils over to Laura, and any extra paper, slide that down to
Can
me.
I- Do we want this to be out there, or should we give you these back?
You can have those. Yep, I would share those with anyone who asked. Those are.